Well, Petros, why don't we begin by your painting a picture of your background and then share your memories of TMS with us.
Thank you, Doug, for giving me this honor to join the League of illustrious TMS alumni, whom you have interviewed earlier, Dr. Aklilu, Dr. Morgan Mariam, Abdullah Abraham, who have shared their thoughts on education, on TMS, and His Majesty. And I'm also delighted to be doing the same thing. My name is Petros Aklilu. I was born in Addis Ababa in 1948. Three other siblings, Petros Aklilu, Tafari Aklilu, and Petros Aklilu. In fact, we all followed our father, who was one of the first students to attend the Tafari Makonnen when the school was opened in 1925. My father was one of those 20-something students who were selected from Addis, and of course there were many other students also who came from the provinces. So TMS really holds a very, very special place in my family. My first 3 years, I attended the then Patriot School, it's called Patriot School, up in the Timur up to third grade. And when I reached the fourth grade, I transferred to TMS. TMS at that time was both boarding and a day school. My two older brothers were actually boarding students, and then myself and my younger brother, we attended the day school. TMS, of course, was known for academic excellence, rigorous discipline, and competitive sports, entrepreneurships, where the school had shops and bookbinding and savings bank, and club activities like Scouts, Debating Society, and Radio Club. So it was such a wholesome education that not only just gave us academics, but also other aspects. My parents were so much devoted to education, and all they could see for us is really to pursue our education to our best ability and to really devote our time, nothing else but education. My father later on, after he attended the 5 years in Tafari Makonnen, he was selected among many other students to join the Holeta military school, and he attended that school, and then it was 5 years later after that, the Italian invasion, and then of course that was history after that. TMS had as is known, had a multinational teaching staff led by Canadian Jesuits. Among my several teachers whom I remember, there were Ethiopians like Ato Asarfa Haile Selassie, whom we all call the scientist. In fact, Ato Asarfa used to pride himself by being the first man in Ethiopia to send a donkey to space. We actually believe that as students. He was such an incredible teacher who had read so much history and science, and although his area was Amharic, there were always other aspects of life that he was sharing with us at the end of the class. There were, of course, a number of Canadians who were great teachers, great disciplinarians. Mr. Gagnon, of course, everybody remembers as the one that we feared. We never questioned Gagnon as, the assistant director. He was always after every student. He knew the names of every student. He even reported, if we made created problems in the school, he even reported, for instance, in my case, to my parents, to my father. He used to call my father, and at the end of the day, when I went home, I thought everything was okay because I knew what I had done in school, I was punished for it. But then another punishment was waiting for me at home. My father would question me, and then of course I would be deprived of one thing or another because of what I have done in school. So it was that much of intensity how the school teachers were really following up both on our academic performance and also our behavior at home. There was also an Indian teacher I remember very well, Mr. Shillong. He was our English teacher, and he, with a British accent, he always reminded us that his motto that he followed when he was a child, and which he wanted us to follow as well, was always, he used to write it on the blackboard. He says, "I learn not merely for school, but for life." I thought that was very profound. We actually felt that, many of us felt that getting good grades was just not an end in itself, but how we utilize the education, we gained at TMS in using it in helping ourselves, our communities, and our country. Now, in 1962, TMS totally changed its environment, its whole structure. I was in the 9th grade, and for the first time in TMS history, since 1925, TMS became a co-educational school with the opening of the commercial school and the home economics section. And if I recall, there were about maybe 30 or 40 girls who were admitted. There was also a year when the first, I think, batch of Peace Corps volunteers came to Ethiopia, and of course TMS was one of the schools that benefited a great deal from Peace Corps volunteers. It was quite a notable change. TMS became a much more relaxed school. We never really associated with our teachers. For instance, the Canadians, they were our teachers. We simply just looked up to them. We were only speaking whenever we were asked to speak, and so on and so forth. And there was really no socialized sort of engagement with them. But now came, with the Peace Corps volunteers, that totally changed. And not only the relationship between students and teachers, but also, between us and the Canadians, and then of course Canadians and also Ethiopians and the Peace Corps volunteers. So it was quite a remarkable, change. Then TMS, was also known for its various activities. TMS was not simply just excelling in education. Every year, of course, TMS scored one of the highest grades in the school living certificates. But we also had, for instance, a radio club where we were broadcasting daily news, sports, and other events from a laboratory that was run by the Canadian Father Payer. And the first newscaster of that was Azaria Kirov, who later became a newscaster for the Ethiopian television. So when he left, I had the fortune of actually taking over that position. So I was asked to be the newscaster. And we used to do that at 3 o'clock during the break. So, and then the way Azaria advised me is to say, okay, go get Ethiopian Herald daily, and then when you come to school, sit down and spend about 15-20 minutes, pick up the highlights from that newspaper, and that becomes your news. And then, of course, you can also interview teachers and students. So I used to do that. It was amazing. And then when I left in 1965 for AFS, which I'll say a few words later on, Petros, my brother, took over, and also he became the newscaster. We also had a very lively debating society. And these debates were held at the auditorium. The debates were on social issues. In fact, a number of the leading debaters, became, student activists, student leaders when they went to university. In fact, going back, the school, even in the 1950s, the students, although they were not kind of organized as a student union, but they were socially also very active, socially conscious, politically conscious, and they were actually holding a number of protests. Of course, primarily it was around their own concerns of accommodation, quality, food quality, and so on and so forth. But then, of course, they were also raising in that occasion some of the political issues as well. So there was an incident that I was actually told that the mayor of Addis came to kind of calm down the students because they were really getting a bit violent, and so he tried to speak to the group there and telling them that, look, this will be done, this will be done. And then the students turned that into an occasion to actually accuse him of what apparently was heard, that he actually diverted some of the resources of the municipality for his own use, and they literally even identified what he has done. He said they were saying pipes were bought, for the city, and here you are, we're told that you are actually diverting those pipes for your own home use and so on. So it was kind of explosive, although that was not really talked about much. When you talk about student movement, it was always in the context of the university. Another thing I should also mention about TMS in terms of what happened. In 1960, the first coup, the Air Force was siding with the Army, supporting the Emperor. The Emperor, of course, was away. And an Air Force pilot trying to actually bomb the headquarters of the bodyguards accidentally hit a classroom of TMS, of the main building. In fact, that happens to be next to the class that I used to attend. And sadly, this pilot, I was told, showed up 2 or 3 days later and then asked for the director, and he apologized, saying, I'm sorry, this was a very school that actually taught me, and I attended Tafari Makonnen, and here I am accidentally hit school. So it was an unfortunate one. So I would say in terms of TMS, it was absolutely, acknowledged by everyone that it was such a premier academic institution that actually produced many of Ethiopian leaders in government, technocrats, military, private sector, academics, social scientists in medicine and so on. In fact, after the war, most of government offices, were actually filled by graduates of Tafari Makonnen. Now, in 1965, I was one of the 3 TMS students selected for the ASS program to finish my high school in the U.S. In fact, for that competition, we had to write essay. And the essay title, if I recall, was the contribution I would like to make to the development of Ethiopia. And of course, having been influenced in what education, the value of education meant in TMS, and also having seen various teachers there, and high moral ethics and performance and so on, I felt education, teaching was the profession that I was going to go into. So I wrote that essay, and I was lucky enough to be selected as one of the 3 ASS students. But unfortunately, life took a different direction, and I never really pursued teaching as a profession. So when I left for the U.S., I first went to New Jersey, lived with a family there. Didn't last very long, only about 3 months. Somehow it didn't work out. And then I was told by AFS headquarters in New York to come to New York, which I did. Told me that, okay, you wait here until we find you family, and that took some time. And I was kind of worried. This was November 1965. I stayed there for almost 3.5 weeks. One episode I remember there, in November 1965, the whole northeastern United States was in a blackout for about 3 days because of failure of power. And just imagine the skyscrapers of New York completely dark. And so it was quite an amazing moment. But of course, finally they found my family. We went to Wellesley, Massachusetts, and that experience opened up new horizon, new future for me, not only for me, but also for my relatives, families, after me, because there was just an amazing family. Very active, socially active, constantly struggling for racial equality. You remember 1965 was a period for the civil rights movement, and our family was always the place where people used to come and then somehow discuss strategies and so on. In one particular case was my American mother was very active in the program that was trying to bring inner city kids from Boston to places like Wellesley, to the suburban schools, because that's where they had the quality education. And so there was, of course, a lot of opposition, and in Wellesley, a very affluent kind of neighborhood. But no, they prevailed, and so there were a number of black students that came to Wellesley. In fact, prior to that, myself and one Black American were the only ones of color, and the rest was just white students. And then this, of course, really changed. And of course, in this family, every Sunday, Sunday dinners was always like an international gathering. Students used to come from neighboring universities, and people would come from church and so on. So it was such an amazing experience. I was well accepted at the high school. I didn't have any problems there. In fact, I joined the soccer team. To be honest, I never really entered the soccer field in Addis. I mean, in TMS. I was playing basketball, I was playing volleyball, but soccer was not something that I even tried. And then, of course, they assumed that, well, coming from Ethiopia, foreigner, and soccer was not that popular at that time in the U.S., they thought that I should be a star. So, well, I did join the team, the high school team, and oh my God, I was being featured in local newspapers, and if I scored a goal, the newsmen used to come and take my pictures and so on and so forth. So there you are. I mean, I kind of found something that I thought I never really would even try. So that was quite an experience. I still keep in touch with the family I lived with, although my American parents both have died. But, my siblings, my American siblings, still around, and so we keep in touch. And then in 1966, I returned to Ethiopia and joined the Haile Selassie First University. And that only lasted for 2.5 years. In 1969, the student movement was really at its highest, and there was a student leader, who was assassinated. And then, of course, following that, the university was closed. So I would say it was really a watershed for Ethiopia, because a lot of students started leaving the country, and I would say quite an exodus. And for me, my parents thought that myself and my brother, should also try to pursue our education in the States. Luckily, my brother was at Oklahoma State University, and Dusrat managed to get a school, through his family, AFS family, because Dusrat followed me as well after I returned as an AFS student. So I went to Oklahoma State University. I did my economics first degree there. There, that was quite an experience, I must relate. Of course, there were few black students, and there was a bit of harassment of students, of black students. by white cowboys. I mean, OSU was known as cowboys. And so at one point, the black students decided to get out of the campus and really camp out somewhere, boycotting classes. So it was a big dilemma for many of us as foreign students who came from Ethiopia. And we kind of felt also, if a black student does not feel comfortable, who's going to make the distinction between black students and then African students? So we all also joined, and that was quite an experience. In fact, I remember the president somehow managed to gather the Ethiopian students because Oklahoma State University had a special relationship with the agricultural school in Alamaya, in Harar. And then, of course, they knew all the Ethiopians, so they gathered and they told us, look, you are Ethiopians. You should come back to class. And we really argued that, look, what sort of security would we have if such a large number of black students do not feel secure, So we actually continued. And then from there, I finished my first degree and then joined University of Massachusetts in Amherst, where I got my master's. And then I returned to Ethiopia in 1973 and joined the Awash Valley Authority. This was an organization that was responsible for the development of the Awash Valley. I must say, at that time, 73 was a period when somehow the Ethiopian economy was really just trying to take off. I mean, private sector, as small as it was, very active. Some of the public institutions like Ethiopian Airlines, telecommunications, Imperial Highway, banking sector, insurance sector, were all really booming, and really plans for expansions and so on and modernization was underway. A number of Ethiopian graduates who came back from the States, from Europe, were actually going into business rather than trying to find a job with the government. So it was really an opportunity for really in Ethiopia to take off. If at that time, if there was a concerted action by the government to somehow bring in some of the fundamental reforms that were long overdue, particularly with respect to land tenure. I think the situation we faced a couple of years after that, with the military taking over, would have been either completely aborted or at least would have been, delayed. Unfortunately, that did not take place. And then, of course, the movement also intensified, and then, of course, labor unions joined, and that brought the dearth in Ethiopia's history.
Thank you, Petros, for your fascinating memories and reflections. His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Haile Selassie, loomed so large in your life as an Ethiopian, as a student, and my life as a teacher. Would you reflect on his contributions to Ethiopia and the imprint you believe he left on his country?
Well, now this kind of brings me to what I see the emperor's contributions to Ethiopia's development in general and also education in particular. Many scholars and historians, have actually written about Emperor Haile Selassie from his childhood days on until he was dethroned in 1974 and then later killed in 1975. I feel I have got an impression of the emperor in terms of what he has contributed to education, because I'm one of the beneficiaries of his foresight. When he was a regent to the throne, and then at that time it was Emperor Daudi to until 1930 when he became king and emperor. He has always brought education as a prerequisite for development. Of course, it was not easy to convince the nobility around him, especially after he took a trip in the early 20s. He toured Europe, many countries in Europe, and what was fascinating, for him visiting those countries was not sure, infrastructure he could see, but he was always asking to visit schools, to talk to teachers, to talk to academics. And I think he came back absolutely convinced that Ethiopia's progress hinged on really expanding education. So when he came back and wanted to actually build the first modern school, although Minlik School was already there, but a school that would bring in expatriate teachers and so on, there was a very, very strong opposition, from parents, who felt that if students join the school, especially with expatriate teachers, there's a possibility that they may even change and convert them into a different religion. So he started a major campaign, to convince parents, to convince the public. First thing he did was to actually convince Emperor Daudi. So she stood, very strongly, behind him, and then he started announcing incentives, for parents to send their children, like giving scholarships and several other incentives. And therefore, when students came to university, to TMS, as I said earlier, including my father, that paved the way for modern education. Again, as modern as it was, it actually opened up people's eyes that sending their children to school was the way to lifetime progress and country's progress as well. So his program in terms of expanding education expanded over time. Again, people would argue that maybe it's not as fast enough as needed. He also, over a period of time, he even launched a major school reform program, which, according to observers, both inside and outside, which would have actually revolutionized education in Ethiopia as well. But unfortunately, that never was implemented and never really implemented. His devotion was also that he took over the helm of the education ministry. He did not take over the Ministry of Interior. He did not take over the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or Police or anything, but he felt that he wanted to see on a day-to-day basis the progress being made in education, and that he was like the Minister of Education for a long time until he appointed a minister until about maybe in the 1950s. He went around the schools, especially the boarding schools, TMS, Wingate, Haile Selassie First High School, at dinner time, and then, brought fruits to students at dinner time and talk to students and asking them, what they're doing in school and how are they progressing, especially those who came from the provinces, because he also made sure that the schools in Addis were not only just accessible to students from Addis, but he actually, like a quota, basically asking every governor in the provinces, to actually send students, a number of students. So there were others, from many, and then, he was basically comforting, especially those who came from, further out from Addis, from our provinces, telling them, look, to persevere and do well in school and so on and so forth. So he was very much hands-on in terms of, managing the schools. He also had an amazing program that if you are first and second at the end of the year in your class, all those students, were taken to the palace, and he actually gave out prizes to every student, first rank, second rank students from every school. In fact, I had the fortune of getting a prize when I was in the Patriot School when I was in third grade. I came out second in my class, so even at that level, we were told to go, taken to the palace, and we were given, prizes. Then, of course, in 1960, following the coup, the aborted coup, he also vacated his own palace, and for the Haile Selassie First University to be launched, there was only the Shava University College in Arab Kilo, and then came the university at that time. Although, again, compared to the number of school-age students, the size of both in elementary and high school and college, was very small, but at least it was really beginning to educate, the young students to come to school and then graduate and then help their countries. One thing also that he himself was very much keen on was in terms of ensuring that not only kids are enrolled, but also ensuring that they were getting quality education. And he made sure that the education ministry was given the whatever necessary budget, that we needed by the schools. And then as a result, when you see students that came out, let's say, from Haile Selassie First University, and then went to graduate school in the U.S. or in Europe, they really excelled. Now, having expanded education like that, the schools also became, the center for, political, social, and economic, consciousness. Students were aware of what was happening outside their schools. In terms of poverty, in terms of what was needed in terms of political and social reform. Annual days, whether it's in high schools or college days, when they were celebrated, students used to write poems. And in those poems were always somehow indicating the need to do something about democratization, about reforms in the country. And then that, of course, kind of created awareness in the outside community of the school, and labor unions started also echoing, similar demands. What was unfortunate was, despite what the students were raising in their own safe haven of universities and sometimes allowed to go out in the streets and to protest, the government never really engaged, the students on these issues. So, having had those, almost 40 years of period when, a relative peace in the country, I think he missed that opportunity. I think if some of the concerns that were expressed, by the students, were actually, addressed. Again, as I said earlier, maybe the transition would have been totally different from what we observed. Now, even the 1960 coup, was a wake-up. In it was a time when he could have thought about, for instance, coups happening in other countries. Instead, the emperor, especially, after 1964, 65, he started becoming more of an international statesman. He started, addressing issues, regional issues, international issues, negotiating among conflicting countries, whether it is, border issues or otherwise. And then less and less in terms of really getting involved in local issues. Now, of course, his government, his cabinet and his advisors were also not, conscious about what was really happening, the dynamics that was taking place in Ethiopia, and there was really, nothing that was being done, and of course everybody felt that unless a signal comes from the emperor, nobody could do anything. Among his international achievements, of course, he organized the OAU. I mean, he waged a constant struggle for the complete decolonization of African colonies. So that really gave him a very prominent status in the world. So if one were to ask, how would history remember him? And as I said, many historians and authors have written about him. I really think he's probably his best memory in the minds of people, I would say, is his liberation struggle, during the Italian War, and his address to the League of Nations. And then later on, as I described, his dedication to education. I would say that was probably, the highlight of his rule. Now, if he had kind of abdicated or passed on the throne to the crown prince with some sort of a limited kind of monarchy as in England, and then allowed, the launching of democratic reforms, I think he would have also been remembered for that. But unfortunately, that did not happen. Then, in 1975, I worked for 2 years, 73, 75, where I was able to really observe what was going on, in Ethiopia. In 1975, I left soon after the emperor was killed. I was given a British Council scholarship, so I left for England. And then a year later, in England, I was offered a job with the World Bank, where I worked for 31 years in countries in Asia, Eastern Europe, Latin America, in China, and Mongolia, which was a very fascinating experience. And again, I always go back and recall the kind of upbringing I had in TMS, which in the discipline and the dedication to duty and so on and so forth, which definitely helped me in my career. Now, among those many years, of course, I've traveled to many countries, I have so many stories I can tell, but one I thought was an amazing experience I had in my job was working on Mongolia. I was working in China and Mongolia, and in Mongolia I was responsible for developing a program for poverty alleviation. Mongolia was under Soviet rule since 1910, 1912. And then all of a sudden, in 1990, the Soviets left, when change started taking place in Russia. And the Russians, the Soviets were helping Mongolia to the tune of 30% of GDP. All of a sudden, that dried up overnight. And then, of course, the Mongolians were left high and dry. But at least what was different was the education system was universal, lots of trained manpower, highly skilled, even trained in higher education and so on. So although the shock was just severe, the recovery was not that difficult. I mean, it was a country of herders, who are used to services like education and health in their own area. Now, all of a sudden, when that stops, somehow they were able to kind of readjust. And that program that I worked on was one that I would say most fulfilling. So I ended up my career with the World Bank after 31 years in 2007 and entered a new life after my retirement.
Thank you so much, Petros Aklilu, for this very informative and fascinating podcast. I appreciate you taking so much time. You know, when I was in Ethiopia, just one last thought, 3 years ago to visit TMS and revisit many locations, and the students I talked with did not seem familiar with the emperor, with his history. In fact, I was struck by how little they seemed to know about Emperor Haile Selassie. Do you think that will change, or is that changing now?
Well, you're absolutely right in terms of the observation about students, not knowing so much about the emperor. Partly because that in the education curriculum, I mean that part was not part of of the history that was taught, and therefore students had no way to know that era, and neither do their parents. I mean, if you look, for instance, at the age of today's students in 10 years, 15 years, 16 years, 17 years at the school, they were only born about 16, 17 years ago. So they don't even know their experience that much. Now, what was interesting in TMS, what I found out, and I'll say a few words about that later on, there was a bust of the emperor at the entrance of the administration building that has been there for many years. Then came the Derg. Derg, in its own wisdom, changed the name of the school to Ntoto rather than Tafari Makonnen. Covered the name of the school that was again on the entrance of the building, which says Tafari Makonnen School, established 1970 Ethiopia calendar. Covered it with a piece of cloth, and then took that bust of the emperor, wrapped it around and threw it in the back. So that was, went on for almost 15 years. And even longer. And then came a dean of that college who apparently was aware that this was such a historic school, and he told me that he wanted to do a documentary on TMS. And it was another fascinating documentary that he put up, researching and all that, acknowledging how the school was actually established, who started it, and acknowledging the emperor's role, and so on and so forth. And then the other thing we did was to bring back the bust, because now it's a vocational school. There are sculpture is one of the in the curriculum. So he asked the students to actually, because the nose part was broken, they put that together, painted it gold. And now, I don't know whether you were there, it was put back. It was placed in an amazing, there, magnanimously. And then students started asking, about the school, who this man was, what he did, and so on and so forth. Just one last story I want to tell you on this one, whether, this is going to change in terms of the students' awareness of the emperor. It is changing. What is amazing is, as we started our alumni association, which I'll say a few words at the end, in fact, we were asking the government to please restore the name TMS. And then we're also discussing this with the students there. And they were telling us that, you know what, when we graduate from here and apply for jobs, we identify ourselves as graduates of TMS. I mean, I thought this was quite fascinating, you know, because and we asked them, why? Why do you do that? It's not about TMS. No. Well, TMS is a trademark. Tafari Makonnen is a trademark. Taxi drivers, they told us, you know, when we asked them to take us to Kilo, they say, oh, near TMS, Tafari Makonnen. So I think in the minds of people now, with a little bit of opening, you know, you see his photo on taxis, you see it in houses and so on and so forth. So I really think it's changing, and then books are being written about the emperor, about his rule and so on and so forth. So I think history is going to bear him out as to who he was and what he has accomplished and what he has done. So I think it's changing, absolutely. I'm very positive about that.